Comedians are underrated, yeah.
Look, it's a small sort of incestuous scene. But those who do well out of it get a lot of corporate work, and they make money.
And I've got a problem with corporate work. I think corporate work kills comedy.
Is this conversation there, by the way?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. That's what I know. So I don't ramble unnecessarily, intrude on your time.
Well, I think we started already, but that's the point.
Well, look, I mean, the reality is that corporations, actually pay.
Sure.
And if you look at corporations as patrons, as they were back in the days of Michelangelo, with his Medici patrons, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Corporations keep artists alive in this country. They honestly do. Everyone from actors to directors to stand-up comedians, they rely on the largesse of the corporations. And there's a heck of a lot of creativity that bubbles under the surface that you don't get to see, because it's part of a kind of subculture of creativity. But no, thank goodness for the corporations. I mean, they absolutely are vital.
Well, there you go. You just changed my mind now. See, 2 minutes.
Sure,
that's all it takes. I just can't imagine George Carlin doing a corporate gig.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he is unique. I mean, as a comedian, it's in the top 10 ever. I mean,
but there would have been times in his career when he would have been what Americans call a pitch man. You get you into studio and you say something funny. I mean, one of the best pitchmen in the history of pitchmen is John Cleese, who, after Monty Python, and they made a lot of money, went into the advertising world and did some incredibly funny commercials that are actually in their own right as funny as Monty Python sketches.
Oh, right.
Getting paid for them, but subversive at the same time. So kind of poking fun at consumerism and at products. Absolutely, but he's John Cleese working for Compaq. So you can combine working for brands, as you might call it, with keeping your creative integrity. Absolutely.
So is there anything that actually offends you, Gus? So, I mean, I'm a Facebook friend of yours for the past 3 years or so. And you, I mean, with respect, I think you're about my father's age. I don't know how old you are. I tell him about Netflix. He will have no clue. You are light years ahead of everyone else about what is good in popular culture, from the White House Correspondents' Dinner to, I mean, I speak of a comedy show I watch. He's like, oh, and you say, I watched it 2 years ago. It was phenomenal. I'm like, how do you know these things?
Well, look, okay. So first of all, it's when you're a journalist. All journalists are generalists. So you have specialist journalists who specialize in certain fields, but that is a relic of the past. To be a journalist nowadays, you have to have a very broad general interest and general knowledge. And also, I think, ever since my childhood, I've had this, there's now a term for it, FOMO,
Right.
I've had this intense fear of, not being in on the conversation. So, people are talking about something, and it's like, what are they talking about, and what's going on, and why don't I know about this? So that curiosity, that drive, is partly why I became a journalist. And then once you figure out what's going on, then you feel compelled to do the opposite, which is tell people. So you spread the word, you kind of evangelize. But journalists have to keep their pulse on the popular culture, not just because it's the popular culture, but because the way the industry is changing. So if you aren't on social media, if you aren't au fait with what's happening in popular music, popular TV, if you aren't interested in how trends are changing, the way people consume media, then it's going to be very difficult for you to be a journalist. And also there is a strong driving impulse journalistically to know just a little bit more than everybody else. If you know more, then you can share more.
Right.
So it's instinctive. I'm genuinely curious about the world. But to answer your original question, honestly, I'm shocked often that there's a difference between shock and offense. So I'll often say to myself, holy shit, when I'm going through something on social media, or when I see something online, or when I see a YouTube video. The latest was Childish Gambino's "This Is America," where I said, "Oh wow,
what a great video!"
Yeah, but in a good sense, I was shocked by it, and I meticulously analyzed it to see what it meant. And but offended? No, I think being offended is like a bit of a luxury. It's like an indulgence. I'm offended personally, and it's an indulgence.
Yeah, I mean, same here. I don't say I can never get offended. I think some things will offend me. Like I watched, the most shocking film of all time is called A Serbian Film. And it is, And you know about it.
I mean,
it's a horrific film.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I couldn't finish it because I was shocked.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think, and there are several movies like that, and I have a curiosity where I might kind of watch a few minutes of it, but there I'm kind of, I suppose I'm not offended, but I don't want to be party to the artist's vision to the extent that I have to watch the whole movie.
Right.
It's enough, 10 minutes, 15 minutes sometimes is enough to get what the artist is going on about, but they are deliberately setting out to provoke and offend, which is a legitimate right of an artist. And absolutely. We've come from an era where we weren't allowed to watch things in case they offended or shocked us. The term back in the apartheid days was undesirable. And the censor board determined what was undesirable and also what was not undesirable.
Right.
We can determine for ourselves what is
Well, now
is
they've got the
undesirable.
Formal and Publications Board for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a relic of the apartheid era. There's absolutely no reason for it. And they completely don't understand the way the modern world works.
No.
And they are concerned that we are going to be shocked and offended, and they want to protect us. That is the instinct of the censor. I mean, Lawrence Dahl wrote a poem about censors that starts, "Censors are dead men." And back in those days, they were all men. And he says, they are dead, and we shouldn't actually listen to them. We shouldn't let them influence our lives. We are living people. So I'm completely against censorship. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you have to subject yourselves to works of art that for one reason or another shock you. You don't have to.
Sure.
Yeah.
But you don't have the right to take it down either.
Absolutely.
Because it's shocking.
Absolutely.
The Spear was a great example of that. You have two random people out of nowhere, a oldish white man and a young black chap, coming in to deface the Spear because they both found it offensive. That's coincidental.
Yeah. Look, we also live in an age when everyone's a critic. So everyone can voice their opinions as strongly as they want to, and to some extent, defacing an artwork is a form of criticism, but it is illegal to do that. It's vandalism. It causes all sorts of problems. But throughout the history of art, people have done that.
Oh, really? So you don't find it to be a form of censorship?
Well, it's a form of preventing other people from seeing that work because it shocks and offends you to the extent. So so it absolutely is censorship. But sometimes it's a statement. I mean, Marcel Duchamp, who was one of the key figures in the French art scene in the early 1900s, he famously didn't actually do this physically, but he famously put a moustache on the Mona Lisa. It's one of his most famous works. And what he was saying is that the age of Da Vinci is over. I was thinking that when watching This Is America, that partly what This Is America is about, it's actually purposely destroying what has gone before. So when he shoots the guy sitting on the chair, who represents to me a blues man playing guitar, and when he shoots the gospel choir, that represents one of the roots of American music, he's actually not physically committing murder. He's kind of making a break with the past. And this is what art needs to do. So people who want to break with the past in whatever way they want to, that is their right as artists. A new world starts from now.
Absolutely. And Jordan Peterson has this thing about the left wing versus the right wing, politically at least. But he says the left are very, very creative because they want to disable and destroy categories and borders between things, whereas the right likes categories and borders very much. So they both actually need each other to make sure that the categories aren't broken to such an extent, but that progress still happens in a way. So you sort of need the two. Well, and a lot of creative people are politically, I mean, they don't have to be political as such, but politically they would be left wing. And that's why I love that there is a left, because without them, creativity and progress in art and, I mean, movies, music would be far more dull. I would suspect.
Look, it's a stereotype, that most most stand-up comedy comes from the left, and most groundbreaking art comes from the left. There aren't terribly many famous right-wing comics, but it's very easy to name dozens of left-wing famous comics. And journalistically speaking, most journalists are liberal-minded by nature, liberal to progressive. There are certainly famous right-wing commentators, but very often in the journalistic field, it's good to be a contrarian. So sometimes you take a viewpoint, not necessarily because it's what you actually personally think,
Right.
but it's in order to get a debate going.
It's useful to get it. Yeah.
But yeah, no, absolutely. Part of Bertolt Brecht said, art is a hammer. It's not a mirror. It's a hammer. So sometimes you need to bash things down to begin again, and that's what music does. Reinvents itself. That's what art does. That's what cinema does. There's nothing wrong with it, and when it happens, new forms are invented. But that moment is always shocked. Like Stravinsky, he had his Rite of Spring. It was literally a riot.
Yeah.
People threw things. They stormed out of the concert hall.
The Vienna Theatre.
It was in Paris. Yeah,
in Paris. Sorry,
yeah,
but there was like a full-on riot when that music started playing.
The way he changed the form actually gave birth to modern music. Picasso, likewise, and people were shocked, mortified, offended. They stormed out. We now accept it as a piece of classical music. But so if we are offended, shocked, horrified by things, creative things, it's actually good because it means a new form is being born. So it's not new. It's part of a cycle of destruction and rebirth that is crucial to art. It has to happen.
And so, I agree with you. It's taken me a very long time to not have a moralistic view on these things. And your Facebook page helped a lot.
Yeah.
And just speaking to people who are artists and creatives and all that helped a lot, because I'm not a traditional person per se, but I like things that work and take things slowly. I'm not a fan of revolutionaries, politically or otherwise. Unless it's social media or tech that helps us. But speaking to creative people, we can never agree on things, but as I said before, I'm really happy that they're around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You speak about art movements because art moves. It's not static. If it's static, then it dies. And that, to answer your earlier question, that's why it's so important to know what is happening. There's actually nothing worse than a movement that is breaking out and you kind of are immune to it, either because you're not interested, which is fine,
sure,
but at the same time discovering only years later that the revolution happened and bypassed you is like, that's scary. We do live in an age of continuous revolutions. Like everything. It'll only be in decades, generations to come that we'll be able to look back and say what a revolution Twitter was, for instance. At the moment, we're just using it as just a platform. But it's completely revolutionary because it is destroying other forms of media. And it's destroying them slowly. It's like there's not a huge, big sledgehammer that destroys conventional media. But it's happening, and particularly in this country. If you want to be depressed, as a journalist, just read the annual ABC figures and just see them plunging. And then, no one seems to say, well, why is this happening? It's just accepted.
Yeah.
But it's the destruction of one form by a new one.
Yesterday, E-Media, which owns ENCA, lost 1.6 billion rand, in the past financial year.
Yeah.
SABC, circulation for newspapers all the way down as well.
Yeah.
But these institutions have lifelines, right? But it's tradition. We're supposed to have real paper. And people will like that. And they really don't. They really don't.
Yeah, look, when I go to the Mug and Bean or in the coffee shop in general, and there's a paper there, I actually enjoy taking the paper and reading a broadsheet paper. For the rest of the time, I do not miss broadsheet tabloids. I don't miss print at all.
No, I think digital is doing what the car did to the horse carriage.
Yeah.
It makes paper a luxury. So you choose to partake in reading a paper.
Yeah.
So make the paper look damn good. Make it, make it out of linen, whatever, some fiber.
But there's arguments. Is it better to read a physical book or an e-book? Complete nonsense. Who cares what form you're reading it in? It's like asking, maybe we should go back to the days of reading books on parchment and on stone. What happened to the poor stonemasons who had to chip out the letters?
Yes.
And what happened to the poor artists who had to, all of these things fade. As long as you are reading, that's important. It doesn't matter. I read on my phone more than on any other medium.
Same here.
Yeah, it's absolutely enough. I can read a book, and then I can read another book. I can read multiple books, almost in parallel with each other. I don't need to haul a whole bunch of paper books around with me, and that's fantastic. There's no point in worrying about what the medium is, as long as you're reading.
Well, I just use Kindle for fiction and books that are easier to read.
Yeah.
But I like making notes in my books. I like my books to be really used.
Yeah.
To look like it's being used. So especially for non-fiction, if I'm reading about ideas or psychology or philosophy or history, I try to buy the paperback or the hardback to make notes in it, and I like the look on the shelf. I think
that's right. Yeah, but of course you can do that just as easily with I use the iPhone's EPUB format. It's great to be able to simply highlight a passage, send it to yourself, make notes. That instinct of scrolling in a book, I've never been able to do that because my father was a librarian, and I grew up with books being sacred. So to me, to this day, if I pick up a paper book and it's got scrawlings in it, I have a moment of revulsion. It's like, you shouldn't do that. This is a book. It's sacred. So for me, it's another reason why I like ebooks so much.
Well, I hunt for second-hand books that have scrawlings in it, especially at the front where it's 2 X, Y, and Z, and the dates. The dates are so important.
Oh, sure.
This was a gift by someone to someone they care about in 1983, and I've got it.
No, those are pieces of history. Absolutely,
I found that quite
they're archaeologically significant. Yeah.
So talking about creativity and censorship more predominantly. Before the state was the boogeyman for censorship, you had to make sure that they don't creep in and step on your ability to express yourself. However, I hope we agree that people tend to self-censor these days. There's a common ideology or narrative or script that one has to be part of.
Yeah. Well, you see, self-censorship
and if you deviate, you get hounded.
Look, the self-censorship actually is pretty much the same as editing. And if we didn't live in an edited world, we would be completely overwhelmed. Just from a sensory point of view, there is such a thing as too much information and information anxiety. So a big part of the job of journalists in particular is actually to edit the world for us. And in the process, of course, you self-censor, because if you didn't, you would have a rambling stream of consciousness. Thank goodness we edit. If we lived in a world where people had unfettered ability to kind of spread their thoughts out in words or in another form, it would be crazy. No one would be able to handle it. So self-censorship is where you cross the line from simply editing to being concerned that your views might hurt, horrify, offend people. And also, you definitely self-censor with the corporate world in mind, absolutely. So if you work for a newspaper or a magazine, you have very strict rules that you have to obey. In the world of journalism, it's called house style. So the rules are incredibly strict even as to how you spell things. And, I've had so many arguments, and it's pathetic that you have arguments about these things, but to me, internet should be spelled with a capital I. House style says must be spelled with a small I. So every time I have to spell internet with a small I, a small piece of me thinks, oh no, this is terrible, I shouldn't do this. So editing happens every time something is produced. Self-censorship is where you are concerned that your views won't fit in with the voice of the paper. Hence, you're not going to find extreme right-wing views in the Mail and Guardian. It's just not going to happen.
No, of course.
But the Mail and Guardian might occasionally, for balance, carry a right of reply piece, or they might ask someone to contribute to a base from the right wing. But if you work for the Mail and Guardian, it's your understanding that it's a progressive paper. So you would inherently self-censor.
And for someone like the Mail and Guardian or Huffington Post, for example, you would know if you're doing well by what people actually say about your article.
Yeah. Look, sometimes provocation is part of what the media is supposed to do. So very often a piece will be deliberately designed to provoke, and you have to be cynical about it, and you have to think this is a clickbait is the term that's commonly used. But you have to know what is authentic and genuine and what is actually just designed to get a rise out of people. And there's definitely room for that. Good columnists, for instance, do need to provoke.
Right.
The fact that they might not actually 100% hold those views or might later on distance themselves from them, that's all part of the game of entertainment.
Sure, and that was the essence of David Bullock's column, Out to Lunch, which was extremely offensive for most people at the time, but the highest readership, most read column, I believe. Well, that's what he says.
Absolutely.
He likes to toot his own horn. He's a good friend. We get along very well. But one column comes out that was in line with the others of 20 years beforehand, and then one column comes out and it's all over.
You know, look, anybody who works for any publication is there at the largesse of the editor. The publishers are not actually that important, but the editor can decide whether you deserve a column, and the editor can decide to pull your column at any moment. And this is why, I mean, newspapers are not by any remote means democracies. They're not collectives. In fact, it would be, you know, it would just be horrendous if there wasn't such a thing as an editor with a firm stamp on the paper who says, "I'm sorry, we're not going to run this cartoon," or "I'm sorry, we're not going to run this column."
Sure.
We live in a world where that actually doesn't matter anymore. It's like, all right, I'm sorry you feel like that, which is okay if I put my column out on social media. Go ahead. Yeah. So there are platforms now. The mainstream media doesn't run the media anymore, and there's no point arguing with an editor's prerogative. Sure, you can argue with an editor, and in fact you actually should.
Sure.
But if an editor chooses for one reason or another not to run something, you're not being bullied by a tyrant.
It's not censorship.
That's their prerogative.
Right? Yeah.
No, I don't actually think it's censorship. I think it's very often is understanding an audience.
But what happens if an editor does run something and gets a lot of blowback and then cancels the column, which is what happened to David Bullard, for example? I mean, that is. Yeah. I would think the editor should be in command of that situation and take responsibility because it's their choice to run the column.
Sure, I mean, you know, the reality is that newspapers in particular are such high-pressure environments that with the best will in the world, you might not read every word that goes into print. So there's a huge amount of trust that people know their briefs and that they know where the line is and that they can cross it. But if they do cross it, that there might be consequences and arguments. And newsrooms are very vibrant places. They're very discussive and discursive places. But once again, you know, that is, if the editor does that, you can scream and rant and rave about it. But you work under the editor's largesse. I mean, it's been tried over the years where you have like democratic systems where everyone's got a say and newspapers are run as collectives and so on. But those papers tend to be very dull. The best papers are those where the editor has a very firm stamp and the political viewpoint might not be 100% what the editor's viewpoint is, and the paper will accommodate lots of viewpoints. But when the crunch comes and the editor says, "You're fired," for a lot of journalists, being fired is like, it's almost like getting a little kind of award.
Oh, really?
yeah. You know, often you put in your CV, you know, fired by the Sunday Express, fired by the Sunday Times, and then you go on to other things. These days, start a blog. Post on Facebook, post on Twitter. You know, don't complain that you're being censored. I can't understand this mentality where you have to be so concerned that your work has to appear in one publication and be given the stamp of approval by that. Go elsewhere. You know, stand on the street corner reading out your work.
Sure.
Yeah. There's so many platforms that it no longer makes any sense to complain. Yeah.
Do you think people underestimate how much freedom they actually have to express their views?
Well, I think look, we're only since 1994, and that's not many years, was it?
No, it's 24.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's so recent that we are still battling to grasp this freedom, and that's why we have, you know, Twitter wars that break out, and that's why the mainstream media are so fascinated with Twitter, because there's so much more freedom on Twitter than there is in the mainstream media. And very often all the mainstream media will do is report on what Twitter is saying. So they outsource the debate to Twitter. But while there is enormous freedom, there is also enormous vigilance over that freedom. So sure, you can say what you want, but we have very strict hate speech laws, and there have been consequences. As Vicky Momberg discovered, you can't simply say what you want to. You have to work within the parameters of what's socially acceptable. But the diversity of debate on social media is huge, and also the attention deficit disorder. So today there's a massive debate and people are being engaged in huge argument. Tomorrow it's forgotten about. That to me is the real freedom, that you can voice what your opinions may be on social media. You can argue, you can engage, you can shout, you can yell, and then the next day.
Do you think it enhances democracy? Because there's a lot of, if I may say, journalists. Yeah. I watched a Monk debate last week between Jordan Peterson, Michelle Goldberg, Stephen Fry. Quite a good debate. Yeah. And Michelle Goldberg is a journalist, try to make the claim that, social media is actually terrible for democracy. And I thought that was a very strange argument to make from a journalist. I think it enhances it dramatically. Yeah. I've learned so much more of what people think from Twitter. Twitter has been the greatest revelation in my mind.
Yeah. No, I think that's
to change my views.
That is scary.
It is
because
scary.
if you follow that argument through to its logical conclusion, and you say, what are you actually saying when you say social media is dangerous for democracy? What's the next step? Let's control or let's ban social media. Yeah. So democracy either embraces all viewpoints or it doesn't. So, social media is actually brilliant for democracy. Social media is democracy. Social media is the 21st century realization of what the ancient Greeks were hoping to do. In the days before, people were allowed to voice their opinions in the Senate. But the idea was that you would discuss and debate things, and those were the seeds of modern Western democracy. But in African society as well, the idea is that no matter who you are, you've got a voice, you can talk, you can argue within a very strict social platform, though. So the idea of this kind of social, we call it social media, but in fact it's just media,
right?
And it's just social. There's nothing original or unique about the idea of people gathering around to talk to each other. That's the basis of society, social equal society. We're still in a bit of a flirtation phase with it because it's so relatively new. Facebook 2004, only 14 years old. Twitter goes back to 2007. So we're still in the sense pondering. However, younger people, so-called digital natives born in the mid-1990s, and this is a big part of the research that I do, they don't use the term social media. It's an alien term to them. They don't even use the term media. It's ambience.
Just an app.
It's just the air.
Okay.
Yeah, it's as normal and as all-embracing as the air. So I'm speaking here just based on what I'm doing for research, which is looking at the way millennials and boomers consume media. Millennials are confused when you say to them, what news media do you consume? They don't think of it. Yeah, it's just like, and I think we should all think like that. We shouldn't think in segmented forms as in, I read this paper, and then I go to Twitter, and then I go to Facebook. It's all in the air, and you actually can't escape it. So like, whether or not you're interested remotely in the royal wedding, whether or not you're remotely interested in the land issue, it'll filter its way into your brain just because these are particles in the air. And that, to me, is exactly what democracy is. So social media is fantastic. You hear people talk about the downside of it, the dark side of it, but I'm absolutely utopian when it comes to social media. I think it's one of the greatest inventions ever in the history of humankind. The internet, firstly, the internet is now like the pyramids of Giza. That's how important it is to our understanding of the world. And then social media is like an offshoot of that. But absolutely, the social media and the internet are right up there with the moon landing, with Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel as brilliant examples of first heart transplant, innovation that changes the way you see the world. So any attempt to lessen the role of social media and any attempt to say that it's not democratic, your democratic right also is not to participate in it all.
Absolutely.
And you find this a lot on social media, where people feel the need to say, I've had enough, and I'm pulling out. Stephen Fry famously did it.
He did.
Who cares? Bye-bye. There's no contract. You're not here on a contract basis. You don't have to resign. You don't have to give a month's notice. You don't need to let us know. Quite honestly, if you leave social media and you're gone, very few people will actually miss you, sadly, because there's so much else to fill the space. But people feel the need to make a moral statement about it, as I'm quitting Facebook, I'm quitting Twitter, I'm quitting Instagram.
I'm taking more time to find me and what's really important.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Reading other people's thoughts every day is really important to me. I don't make that statement every day.
See, I'm not like
to go on Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm doing this because it's important.
Excellent.
No, I just do it because it's part of life.
Yeah. I'm far less interested in people's opinions than I am in their stories. Yeah, there's like, opinion is like the ultimate commodity on social media, and everyone's got multiple opinions.
Indeed.
They mean far less to me than people's stories. I want to know, like, what Facebook says is what's on your mind. What Twitter says is what's happening. I'd far rather know what's happening in your world than what's on your mind. Yeah, because Democracy is fantastic, and you can voice your opinion, but it's far less interesting to me than what you did today and what crazy things happen in your world. That's what I'm interested in.
Okay, so do you watch YouTube vlogs?
I do occasionally, but only if they are. The ones that I do watch, I tend to watch for very specific reasons. For instance, they'll be tech blogs.
Oh, right.
So if I want to buy a phone, I'll watch a lot of YouTube vloggers, as they're called, to see what they have to say.
Because I mean, that's what they do. I mean, do you know a chap called Casey Neistat?
Yes,
he's
he's my son's idol. My son's he's 20 and he wants to be Casey.
He has made the mundane entertaining. Because he's got a cool. He lives in New York City. He's got a cool, electric skateboard, electric things. And every day he does. I don't know what he does for work. He's creating like a collaborative YouTube space but it's 10 minutes. Video on YouTube, and it is one of the most entertaining pieces of content you can watch every day.
My son showed me a lot of them, and he's very good. And effectively, he simply is a 21st century broadcaster with his own channel.
He's a filmmaker. He's a filmmaker, but he makes the mundane entertaining. He goes to buy a juice at whatever shop. And it's different takes, it's camera angles, it's rewind, speed up. I mean, it's fantastic.
There's some very good ones in South Africa as well. There's a whole genre of people who actually make a living from having a platform on YouTube. It's great. The only thing that I don't really like about it is it requires much more commitment.
It does.
So you have to commit yourself to watching. Even if it's 3 minutes, it's usually much longer than that. But social media I can read as a stream, and I can pick out keywords, and it flows. I like the flow of it.
Okay.
So my preference is for the written, printed social networks, the verbal ones.
Yeah, because back to democracy and social media, I think it enhances it greatly. Because I have no greater, I have greater pleasures, but I have great pleasure in calling out political leaders for saying silly statements online.
Yeah,
I think it's a great democratic act on my part, even though I'm not a Democrat, technically speaking. I think it's great to do that.
No, it's a form of.
You can put it on the table if you want.
Okay, it's basically it's a form of heckling that was previously denied to us. So Parliament is meant for the people, and anyone theoretically and in practice can go into Parliament, and you're not really meant to heckle. That exceeds the bounds of decorum. But on social media, you surely should use that freedom you have to call politicians to account, to jibe them, to insult them.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and memes.
And and once again, within the bounds of just acceptable. I think it's important to define acceptable behaviour. I mean, if you simply are using social media to simply swear at politicians, how are you adding to the debate?
No, not at all.
If you make them uncomfortable, if you have the best debates on Twitter, the ones I like the best are those where people. They don't necessarily find common ground, but they find a sort of mutual respect for the other's views.
They try to understand each other's views. It's rare, but I mean, my views have changed dramatically on Twitter.
That's right.
By people just saying, you're wrong in this instance. And then I meet those people in real life. That's what I use Twitter for, actually. I joust, and then you meet them in real life, and then you made a friend.
No, look, even in our political arena, which is highly antagonistic, people actually get on with each other very well.
I know.
So across the benches, after that, I think one of the great saving graces of South Africa is that people can stand together around a braai with Klipdrift and a beer and so on, and can talk to each other. If we didn't have that, we'd be in real trouble. So on a social level, people do relate to each other. On an ideological level, it's a complete opposite. They butt heads, but that's what democracy is.
Exactly. And that's what people, I think, maybe struggle with, in essence, because I want democracy to be polarizing, antagonistic, distressing. That's the price of freedom. I mean, that's the price you pay for living in a free society. And I don't want to sanitize freedom like Singapore. Where you're not allowed to,
That's right.
It's accent speaking, but in Singapore you're not allowed to proselytize about your faith in public, for example.
That's right.
Because that creates tension.
Well, even on our own continent, in Rwanda, for instance, you can't openly criticize or insult the president. I mean, journalists get into huge trouble, and many have even died in the process. So the freedom we have to openly insult our president, and this came to the fore last year with the anti-Zuma marches. I mean, those were fantastic from whatever side of the spectrum you came. that is not to be underestimated.
No.
You can carry a poster in your hand that openly insults the president of the country. Fantastic.
No, the posters are the best thing about the marches. Even in the Women's March, okay, the Women's March
Yeah.
wasn't that great in terms of posters.
Yeah, yeah.
But if any protest,
Yeah,
excuse me, with placards,
yeah.
the creativity just shines through.
That's right.
And that's what. I started to sound utopian like you guys.
Yeah.
But the amount of creativity people have,
Yeah,
generally speaking, always blows me away, because I'm not a
Yeah.
very creative person in that regard.
yeah,
But
yeah.
a small act by someone who's a protester with a placard, and
Yeah.
and it's hilarious.
Yeah.
The placard.
That's another reason why social media are so important, because they allow people to think creatively. So, like, Twitter encourages you to think in 280 character bytes. And as soon as you have to do that, you have to actually really think about the way you think. And it's a very different way of communicating than we've been used to previously in history. And as a result, people come up with very creative ways of using these networks. So every time that there are any concerns about social media as being any sort of threat to democracy, which is ludicrous, it's completely the opposite. It actually fulfills the promise of democracy. But any time that happens and you feel overwhelmed by let's call it the ugliness of social media, simply turn to people who are doing amazing things on social media.
Sure.
Turn to people who are using social media as art platforms. Look at what's happening on YouTube. Look at bands who before wouldn't have had a hope in hell of getting their music even opened on the desk of an A&R man in a record company, are now actually making careers on YouTube. That is fantastic.
Yeah,
So-
unfortunately, it's Justin Bieber, but that's the price we pay, right?
Yeah, but also the world we live in, where nothing's a secret anymore. I used to be a music critic on the Sunday Times, and there was an elite. So you would be part of the music elite in the sense that you would get an early listen to a new album that everyone was going to be talking about in 3 months down the line. That elite doesn't exist anymore. As soon as something is released, it's oxygen. So I can read about a piece of music that may not remotely be in my taste, but within a minute I can be listening to it on Spotify.
Exactly.
Yeah, so nothing is secret, nothing is underground. There's no such thing as an underground anymore. In fact,
Yeah.
to even talk about a mainstream is very misleading, because everything is now mainstream, and
Sure.
the mainstream is the internet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's why, just going back to like democratic accountability, Michelle Wolf
Yeah,
at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
yeah,
Listeners, if you haven't seen it, just go watch that first and then come back, because it was fantastic.
Yeah.
She stood up and she gave everyone in the room a big middle finger. Republican, Democrat, journalist, anyone who was there who felt a little bit self-important.
Yeah.
She just gave them the finger. So it was almost like bringing someone who heckles you on Twitter onto a stage
Yeah.
and giving her the mic.
that's right. That's
And all
right.
the attention.
Yeah, I think
And you thought, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, and you said she's your new comedic hero. But it was very controversial at the time that she's saying these bad things about these politicians.
Yeah.
That is the point. That's the essence of having her.
Yeah, I certainly found sections of what she did not to be shocking because they were shocking, but because they were so risky that they were destined to fail. So a stand-up comedian who can do that, it takes courage. It takes courage to fail completely and for your jokes not to land at all, and then you go on to the next one. So I think what she did very cleverly was that she knew that her real audience was outside the room.
Indeed.
So she wasn't actually doing her gig there for the White House correspondents and for the officials and for the members of the White House elite. She was actually doing it for the mass audience, and the audience is massive. It starts as small. It starts as people who know who she is, who are interested in stand-up comedy, who know what the White House Correspondents' Dinner is, and like within hours, her audience is the world. So that once again is part of the creativity of this medium. What amazed me about that Michelle Wolf thing is how many people watched it entirely in order to be shocked and offended by it. If you are shocked and offended by something, stop watching. Yeah, use your disgust is a very strong human impulse, and it's there for very important reasons. If we didn't have the impulse of disgust, we wouldn't survive as babies.
Sure.
Because we would just eat anything.
Yeah.
So that impulse aesthetically lingers in our reaction to things. If you are disgusted by a work of art, stop watching. Your instinct is telling you to stop. Don't feel that you have a duty of some kind to watch it. Just stop. and then go away and don't tell other people that they can't watch or that it's offensive and shocking.
Oh, really? Do you find that not offensive to you, but you find it offensive that other people find art or creativity offensive?
So the one thing I do find offensive is people who try and have art banned or moderated or removed from public view or changed in order to fit in better with people's sensibilities. That's offensive. Yeah, they have absolutely no right to do that. A gallery has a right to display or not display an artwork. That's fine. They're private spaces, or even if they're public spaces. But people who wander off in from the street and see an artwork and are disgusted by it and then attempt to have that artwork removed, they are offensive.
Yeah.
No, that's not their right. They must walk out of the gallery. They must write a letter of complaint. They must post on social media. But their interaction must stop at the level where they interfere with other people's rights to...
Or just mock it, for goodness sake.
Yeah, absolutely.
And mockery is the best use of offence.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But you know, whether you... And, of course, as soon as you start mocking, then people get offended by the levels of satire. And there's always like, yes, but you can't cross the line. You know, the line is here. But who draws the line? Only the artists draw the line.
The arbiters of this morass called society draw the line. They're the line drawers.
Yeah.
And they assume they're speaking on behalf of many millions of people, and they're really not. Because no one knows who they are.
That's right.
And B, morality is completely subjective. So.
Yeah. But that is the fantastic thing about society, that they actually don't matter anymore.
No,
so you can have arbiters, whether they are legislative arbiters or moralistic or creative arbiters, and you can actually completely ignore them because of the fantastic democratic nature of the internet. So as long as you have access to the internet, it is, you know, without overstating it, it is as important as any other human right. You can't have a working, progressive society that will thrive and prosper without access to internet and broadband internet. Absolutely.
I made the argument as a human right thing quite a few years ago. I think it was Norway did it like in 2004.
That's right.
Or something, and I thought that's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
And then the more you think about it, the more it makes sense, obviously.
Yeah.
But are there any downsides to your position? Information, creativity, the internet being a human right. I mean, there are downsides.
Yeah, I would say the big downside is the tendency to lose focus, actually. So the downside for me isn't political or moral or anything like that. It is, and I find it a lot. So for instance, back in the 80s when I used to buy a vinyl album and very carefully take it out of its sleeve and listen to it for days and days and like almost fall in love with it, have a relationship with it, that focus has gone now, because you know, if it doesn't grab you instantly, you're unlikely to go back. So the downside of like free information in all its forms is that you lose some of the aesthetic luxury of having a relationship with information and with art. So like, you know, I can read an entire issue of the New York Times in like half an hour by skimming headlines and by cherry picking what I want to read, versus the days when you would take half the day to read the Sunday Times, or the New York Times on a Sunday. So so the downside to me isn't in any way a concern about what people are saying, etc., etc. Quite the opposite. To me, that's all upside.
Okay.
If people, you know, like I cannot recall one point where I thought, you know, I've got to leave Twitter. This is getting too much, or I can't stand this Facebook anymore. You know, people are saying such ugly things. You know, use your freedom, to censor. In other words, block, mute, unfriend, do whatever you need to take those viewpoints out of your stream. They're like, and if you think of it as a stream, they're like little logs that get in the way, and you trip over them, and they impede the free flow of information. You know, you exercise your own right to remove them from your stream, and you personally, and once again, this is a word that everyone uses these days, you personally curate your level of engagement with the world, but you can't take your own personal curation and apply it to other people. You absolutely can't. You must openly criticize people where they are in some way interfering with the free flow of democracy themselves, and you must engage vividly and vibrantly and openly with people, but it must stop at the point where you say, we can't listen to this viewpoint anymore, and you have to leave. Sorry, like kicking someone out the room, so you can't be here talking. Yeah, social media, there's no such thing. Yeah, Twitter can, if they want to, and they've done this a couple of times, they can like suspend your account for sure, and there are often good reasons for that. And open threats of violence, open hate speech, absolutely. I don't see anything wrong there with people having accounts suspended temporarily until they come to their kind of senses and enter the debate again in a correct way. There are correct ways. But
so you see, there is a correct way.
Well, yeah. So the correct way is engage with people. Don't descend immediately to ad hominem attacks, because they just uglify social media. They can be amusing and entertaining sometimes. You know, there's such a thing as amusing ad hominem attacks. But if that is all you have to offer on the social networks, if all you have to ever offer is attacking people and swearing at them, you're not really contributing to the furtherance of.
Well, I don't know. I actually disagree. So when David Cameron was Prime Minister, he had a Twitter account.
Yeah.
And I think he used to tweet himself.
Yeah.
And the responses were just glorious, especially after the pig scenario in that book. I mean, it was just a stream of abuse.
Yeah.
But the most hilarious, humorous abuse I've ever
You see, that's different. That is so the English character is that you loathe your politicians, whoever they may be, and the English character, and they don't have this constitutionally, but they have always had this very strong feeling of the serfs, you know, the peasants being able to speak out against the king, and that lingers on social media, and it often is very funny. But so wit is very important. If you can say something with a degree of not necessarily make people laugh, but just intelligence and humor combined, you're contributing to the furtherance of democracy, because what you're saying is of use to people. It makes them laugh, it makes them think. But outright abuse, I don't think it really achieves anything.
Sure.
Yeah. So I certainly wouldn't suggest that such people aren't allowed to be abusive on social media.
But it doesn't serve a real purpose.
No, it's dull. It's like hammering against the wall, thud, thud, thud. You know, as opposed to.
So, are you a traditionalist in any sense? I mean, do you have views about how modern journalism is as opposed to how it was in the 80s? I mean, do you think there's a claim you can make that today's better than last, than in the 80s, for example? Can you make that claim? Do you argue about that?
All the time.
Or do you just see it as a progression that can't be controlled by anyone or anything? So you just accept it for what it is now.
Well, see, one great thing about social media as well is that it splinters into little subgroups of special interest groups that are sort of more or less private. And on Facebook, I belong to a bunch of journalist groups. Some of them are specifically for journalists from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And the level of head shaking there and regret at the decline of the profession is huge, and very often with very good reason. I mean, in the space of the past few weeks, we've had so many incidents of journalists like getting it completely wrong, and journalists using social media as their primary source, and journalists not checking facts. Those things go against the entire foundations of what the profession is meant to be, and one of the foundations is accuracy and fairness and so on. So when that happens, it's kind of embarrassing, and it's very bad. So traditionally, absolutely. If journalism has to achieve anything, it has to be like a monument to those things: accuracy, fairness, diversity in its coverage. As soon as those foundations start crumbling, journalism is probably at its. It's funny. It's like at one of its lowest ebbs when it comes to public trust, but in terms of innovation and the use of media and the possibilities for the use of media, it's one of the most exciting periods in the history of journalism.
Yeah, and that's a funny paradox in a way. Yeah. Because, believe it or not, I want journalism to be good.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know that what I read is accurate to a degree that is acceptable, whatever that acceptability rate is, 90% or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
But if you have a piece, I think people do make a mistake between editorial and reporting. So there's reporting, and then there's all these words. Do you know a company called The Knife Media?
Yes, they're actually very good.
Right.
Yeah.
And they show the article, and they say all these words are trying to imprint ideas into your mind about what
That's
the
right.
author thinks about this particular subject. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see what words are used
That's right.
to create a picture for you.
Yeah.
When it's supposed to be, it's supposed to be a factual reporting of what actually happened. Donald Trump walked to the podium, said these words in quotes, left the podium.
Yeah.
But now he swaggered
Of course.
up to the building and he slapped his fist into the podium. Meanwhile, he probably just touched it.
Yeah.
And all these words just create an impression in your mind.
Yeah.
Surreptitiously.
Absolutely. That often comes from the unhidden political viewpoint of the paper. The New York Times is openly Democrat and liberal, so is the Washington Post. The Daily Mail in the UK is openly right-wing and anti-immigration and so on and so forth. So you understand where it comes from, and you do understand. But I think this is why it's important. I can't bring myself to read the Daily Mail. I find it very difficult. But it's very important to have a very diverse range of media that you consume, and to be highly skeptical at the same time, to know that the political leaning of the paper is going to be reflected in the reports, and then to make your own mind up.
Well, that's why ANN7 was such a breath of fresh air.
I'm not sure it's a fresh air, because almost everything ANN7 did was like completely wrong. Like they hired models from a model agency as newsreaders.
Right.
In other words, they pretty much they trampled on the notion of professionalism in journalism, and from the day that they started, everything just went hilariously wrong.
Right.
So,
just in terms of bias, I think they were quite forthright with their bias.
Yeah.
Not in terms of saying yes, we are actually pro the Zuma faction or whatever, but just the way they spoke about things. They just did a bad job of hiding their bias. Essentially.
But also, no respected credible commentator would appear on an ANN7 panel, so they had to scrape the barrel like these sort of bargain bin books. They had to get people who were, to put it mildly, dubious. And I'm only going on this by following their social stream. I watch absolutely no broadcast TV at all.
Oh, no, me neither.
Yeah, so I haven't actually watched the ANN7 broadcast since the hilarious early days,
the launch
when
was
they were
fantastic.
compelling viewing, because what can possibly be worse than this? And then something worse happens. But so on the spectrum, fine, let them be there, no problem with that at all. But they were there to fulfill a very, very clear agenda.
Sure.
And if they had done it professionally, it would have been different. But they did it amateurishly.
Very bad.
Yeah, and I feel quite bad for the journalists who were employed by them and by the old new age that's now called Afro Voice.
Yeah.
Working journalists who have standards and credibility to begin with. Yeah. The more papers there are, the more platforms there are, the better. But they are competing with free and open platforms in the modern age, and if they don't find something unique to compete on, they won't survive.
But there's this fallacy of objectivity.
Yeah.
Or am I just being...
Oh, yeah, no. No, look, I think that's...
I mean, for example, I'm just going to name, for example, The Star, ENCA to some degree. They try to be objective, and that, to me, objective equals bland.
Yeah.
It's just... You read it because it's there, not because you have an interest in what's in it.
Yeah.
Why is objectivity still seen as, or is it rather still seen as some sort of measurement? Of humans aren't objective creatures, and even academic writing is not objective. The academics' personal background, personal kind of context will be reflected in even the driest academic article. So newspapers are popular forms of media, and they need to communicate with people on a level where they are accessible and entertaining and informative and also provocative. But journalists are completely and absolutely human, possibly more so than other people. I don't think there is such a thing as an objective newspaper, and there never has been. But they try to portray themselves as such, and I think it's just defeating the point.
So look, objective is a bit different to fair. So a newspaper should go out of its way to make sure that all views in in an issue are adequately reflected. And even if it's something as simple as, the old standby, so-and-so was not available for comment at the time of going to press. At least make an effort to make it seem that you went out of your way to speak to this person, give them a right of reply. But so the absolute opposite of objectivity is what happened, for instance, with Musi Maimane, where he spoke about, they call me a mini Mandela,
right? And
then what was cut out was the crucial part, which is they call me a sellout.
Yeah.
So I can't remember where that came from and who first carried it.
I suspect.
Yeah, but it was edited, so it was the opposite of objectivity. So editing is good, but editing for effect is also bad.
Sure.
Because if you just show people a snippet, you are not in any way giving them an objective picture. An objective picture is, this is what was said. Here's the full clip for you. Make your own mind up. As soon as you start snipping out crucial bits of information, you are deviously and maliciously making people think in the way that you want to. Yeah, so that's the opposite. So objectivity doesn't mean that you adopt a completely neutral stance. That journalists are not dispassionate. They are, in fact, extremely passionate when it comes to the issues they cover and the way they cover them. But you are dispassionate in the sense that you allow for other viewpoints. So basis of journalism, a fundament is that you get the other side. If you don't, then you are simply pushing an agenda. But advocacy journalism is a legitimate field of journalism, as in the journalist has a viewpoint, and the viewpoint might be as simple as all South Africans need access to antiretrovirals. That's not a controversial viewpoint.
Sure.
But you advocate for that.
Sure.
You push for that in your
Like
reporting.
Ivo Vechter, okay, he's a columnist.
Yeah.
The columnist is different from... different from a journalist.
Yeah, well, see, Ivo I think he's a very good researcher, and he will go out of his way to verify and to reference his viewpoints. Yeah. There's an opinion columnist who simply, which is very valuable place in journalism, will simply rant and spew, and they are often very entertaining, but they don't have the burden on their shoulders of proof and of reference.
Like Ron Liddell of The Spectator. What's that? Liddell?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
Hilarious columns.
Yeah.
He would never get away with it here.
That's right.
He'll be at the Human Rights Commission every second.
Yeah.